year ago, the collapse of the U.S. investment bank Lehman Brothers triggered the rapid financial meltdown. And on the eve of the anniversary, RT's Marina Portnaya asked American economist Peter Schiff why it happened, and what can be done to recover from the crisis.
The financial meltdown that has taken place over the past year is a crisis the world has not experienced in decades. Economist Peter Schiff is one of the very few people who could turn around and say, "I told you so." And now we are sitting down with Mr. Schiff, author of Crash Proof 2.0, president of Euro-Pacific Capital. Thank you for joining me. The collapse of Lehman Brothers is being used as a marker to note the one-year anniversary of the U.S. financial meltdown. Now, what steps do you think have been positive ones in terms of what the U.S. has done over the past year?
Well, I think we've done everything wrong. I think the only thing, ironically, that the government has done right was letting Lehman Brothers fail. You know, after they bailed out Bear Stearns, they were creating a moral hazard that, well, you know, firms are too big to fail, so go ahead and lend all these too big to fail firms money because there's no risk there. The government's going to bail everybody out. So I think the government realized the potential problems there. And so when Lehman Brothers was in trouble, they wanted to have some type of precedent of letting somebody fail because they didn't want that moral hazard. So I think that was kind of like a trial balloon. They did the right thing, but they really weren't prepared for the consequences. Because the consequence of doing the right thing means a lot of people and a lot of voters lose money. And it means people lose their jobs. And I think they surrendered their political will very quickly. And so now they've promised to never let anybody fail. And it's interesting, too, that most people point to their failure to bail out Lehman Brothers as their major mistake of the government. It was their only shining moment.
The most recent U.S. jobs report has been hailed as good news by many officials. Now, 216,000 jobs were lost last month, as opposed to the 230,000 that were expected to be lost. And unemployment jumped from 9.3% to 9.7%. Is this good news?
Well, you know, in the world of Wall Street, if the news is slightly less horrific than they're anticipating, they can say it's good news. And, you know, obviously we're losing jobs at a slower pace than we were a few months ago. But, of course, it was impossible to keep up that pace. It was so frantic. But we're still losing jobs. We're not creating them. So how does that mean that the situation has turned around? And also, the unemployment number is misleading because it doesn't include a lot of people who really are unemployed. For example, it doesn't include people who are so discouraged from their job seeking that they've given up looking. They want jobs, but they're not even looking. They're not considered unemployed anymore. Also, a lot of people who are looking for full-time jobs take a part-time job to help make ends meet. Somebody, for example, might be an engineer. He has a $75,000 a year job. He gets laid off. While he's looking for work, he takes a part-time job at McDonald's, you know, making French fries at minimum wage because he has to pay his rent. According to the government, this person is no longer unemployed, even though they're looking for work every day, and even though they're making minimum wage part-time instead of a real salary. So there's a lot of those people. When you count those two categories, disgruntled people and people working part-time who want to be working full-time, the unemployment rate is 16.8%. And that's an official number from the government. And another thing that we're not talking about today is a lot of Americans are not employees. They're independent contractors. For example, most realtors in this country work as independent contractors. So they don't get laid off. They just stop earning money. So they're not considered unemployed anymore, even though they're not earning any money. And the reason that we have so many independent contractors in this country is because the governments and all the state governments have such onerous rules and laws that employers have to follow in order to employ people, that in order to get around those laws, a lot of people don't employ anybody. Instead, they hire what we call an independent contractor. So the independent contractor is not an employee. Most real estate brokers are independent contractors. Most insurance brokers are independent contractors. A lot of stockbrokers are independent contractors. So these guys don't lose their jobs because they never had jobs. But you know what they do? They lose their income. which is just as bad.
When you consider how high unemployment was during the Great Depression, the numbers that you're presenting right now are a bit frightening.
I think it's already pretty close. I mean, the Great Depression peaked out at about 25. My feeling is when you properly measure the unemployment rate, it's closer to 20% right now. So it's not as bad as the Great Depression, but it's pretty close. Whereas the government wants us to believe that unemployment was almost 3 times as high in the Great Depression than it is today, and that's not the case.
The Congressional Oversight Committee that is overseeing the U.S. federally funded bailout programs, they say that taxpayers will unlikely receive and recover all the billions of dollars that have been given to General Motors and Chrysler. What do you say about this?
They're not going to recover any of that money. In fact, we're going to need more money. We are supporting a non-viable business that will lose money in perpetuity. The only way General Motors is going to be able to stay in business is if it gets continual subsidies from the U.S. government. And of course, now that you have that situation, well, the labor unions can demand pay raises indefinitely. The executives can keep demanding pay raises because their pay has nothing to do with the profitability of their company. Their pay has to do with their political clout, their ability to get Washington to appropriate money and give it to General Motors employees. This is a giant money pit, and American taxpayers are going to be paying for this through the nose. What we should have done is we should have let General Motors go bankrupt the old-fashioned way. The same thing we should have done with Chrysler. We should have had nothing to do with it.
Many prominent businessmen and speculators here in the United States, including George Soros, have come out saying that the biggest concern over America's economy is that eventually this country will collapse like the Soviet Union did.
Well, I mean, the Soviet Union certainly collapsed for many of the reasons that we're in trouble. They simply, the government was too big. They spent a lot of money they didn't have maintaining an empire around the world. And ultimately, they couldn't control that empire because they ran out of funds. The United States, we support an empire of sorts. We have a huge military presence around the world that we can't afford because we're borrowing the money. Our government has promised tremendous entitlements to American citizens that it can't afford. We've also borrowed money from the rest of the world that we can't afford to repay. So we're basically broke, and I don't think the U.S. government can afford to maintain this empire. Hopefully, we don't, see a similar fate in that the United States breaks apart, that states decide they want to leave the Union. If things get bad, if we can continue on this path, and if the U.S. government continues to make these mistakes, continues to increase the deficit spending, keeps bailing companies up, propping companies up, and raises taxes to finance it, I could see movements beginning in various American states to get out from under it.
According to our previous interviews and your books, you're a big advocate of investing in gold. But what recommendations can you make to those that are living paycheck to paycheck and do not have enough money, $10,000, $20,000, to invest in gold? What are they supposed to do?
If they can't afford gold, they can buy silver. They can buy copper. They can look for pennies that were made before 1981. They're copper. All of these things are going to gain in value. But other things that you can do as an American is you can prepare by stockpiling things that you might need, non-perishables, food items that that you can keep for years that won't go bad. Other things, you can have extra batteries or shaving cream, razor blades, toothpaste, a lot of other things that are likely to get very expensive because of the inflation that we're creating, and ultimately might be hard to get. You might want to stock up on cigarettes or wine. Even if you don't smoke, it might be good to have a bunch of cigarettes because you can trade them for something you need for somebody who does smoke.
I know that you're seriously considering a run for the Senate seat in Connecticut. Why is it that you want to throw your hat in the ring of politics?
I am very seriously considering this. I'm probably very close to making an announcement with respect to my candidacy. And the reason that I want to run for Senate is to prevent the worst case scenario from unfolding. Unfortunately, there's nobody in the Senate today who understands basic economics. Nobody really understands why we're in this mess, how we got here, and they certainly don't know what it takes to get out of it. And so somebody needs to go to the Senate and try to convince the other senators, educate them, get them to understand why we're in so much trouble, why their actions and their policies undermine the free market, that capitalism is not the enemy, that they're the enemy, that Washington is the enemy, and that we need to re-embrace free markets.
I've heard you say that if winning a Senate seat, that Congress will not be able to control you. Will you really be able to go against the grain on Capitol Hill?
Well, first of all, the reason I said that is most senators, when they get elected, the first thing on their mind is getting reelected. And so they want to get reelected, so they have to ingratiate themselves to the senior ranking members. They want to get put on the right committees. And so they're always basically towing the line, right? They're trying to, secure their position so that they're more likely to get reelected. I couldn't care less about getting reelected, right? I just want to go there and try to help solve this problem. So I'm not going to be, sucking up to anybody. I'm not going to spend my time trying to get reelected. So they're not going to be able to bribe me or tempt me with things that other senators, might have fallen for, because I don't have the same agenda.
I've heard you say repeatedly that America does not learn from its mistakes. How do you think the country will act moving forward?
Well, it's not so much that America, doesn't like to admit its mistakes. It's more that our political leaders, it's the politicians, it's the central bankers. They just keep repeating their mistakes. And if they want to admit a mistake, it's not a real mistake. Like they'll say, well, our mistake was we didn't regulate enough. Well, that's not a real admission of anything. That's an excuse to increase their power base. We need to change that philosophy. We need to understand what we've done wrong, what our nation, what our leaders have done wrong, the laws that we've passed, the subsidies that we've enacted, the regulations that we've enacted that have so distorted the free market, that so disrupted the natural forces that would have kept our economy in balance. If we can roll back government and repeal regulation and restore sound money, then we can have a bright future.